This man was cursed to be trapped in the tutorial tower for 12 years. Every time he cleared the final floor, he was sent back to the beginning. After hundreds of attempts, he grew frustrated and gave up. On his 433rd attempt, he even disguised himself as a beginner guide NPC, and by the 512th attempt, he became a training instructor just for fun. Without realizing it, 12 years had passed, until suddenly, a notification appeared. The curse will be lifted if you clear the tower this time. Could this finally be his freedom? But how did it all begin? One day, monsters began appearing all around the world, bringing destruction and panic. At the same time, a mysterious structure emerged, and people called it the Tutorial Tower. For the first time, humanity had to face this tower. Without mercy, the tower transported people from all over the world into it, forcing them to face brutal trials. Age, physical condition, or background didn't matter. The success rate for exiting the tower was only 20%, and those who succeeded were called hunters, humans with extraordinary abilities who became the new hope for mankind. For 12 years, the Tutorial Tower remained a mystery. However, when it was finally conquered for the first time, the world changed. Hunters became symbols of power and the new idols of society. Their fame and wealth rivaled that of celebrities. Nations began to consider hunters as a factor of national strength. To protect them, hunter associations and guilds were formed to maintain stability. In a famous television show all about hunters, the host introduced three special guests, the leaders of the best guilds in Korea: Seo Kwan-han from Guild Goryeo, Seo Yong-lee from Guild Orangs, and Si-hyun Kim from Guild Seoul. The program gained massive popularity, with a rating of 35.7% last week. During the last segment of the show, the host asked the most frequently asked question from viewers. It's said there's a master who still lives in the Tutorial Tower in Korea. Who is this master? The three guests looked surprised hearing the question. The host continued, mentioning that he had read stories about this master online. He then asked, "Do the guild leaders know who this master is?" With a smile, Seo Kwan-han replied, "There's been a lot of news about him lately. It seems he's not dead and is still alive." His answer indicated that he knew who the master was. Seo Yong-lee added, "Everyone knows about him. He entered the tower with us in the first wave, 12 years ago." Si-hyun Kim said that it might be a curse because only this master never left the tower. He completed every level only to return to the first and repeat it. The host tried to confirm, so this person entered the tower in the first wave, 12 years ago, and kept completing it over and over. The three of them nodded in agreement. Then the question arose, if the purpose of entering the tower was to gain power, would someone who has completed it multiple times have unimaginable strength? Some hunters who came out of the tower shared stories about this individual. They had seen the master complete the tutorial floor in just one day, an impossible feat. They suspected his power surpassed that of a normal hunter, possibly even on the level of rank A or S. However, even after conquering the tower, this person stayed inside and kept repeating it tirelessly. In one story, a party was seen running in fear, chased by a huge monster. But in the middle of the hallway, a man stood still, not moving at all. Suddenly, a massive explosion echoed, destroying the walls around him. Yet, the man remained standing fearlessly. Soon, a notification appeared. Tutorial Tower Level 100, monster for the final test. Before the man, a terrifying figure appeared, a giant monster named Balok. Many believed that if this man left the tower, he would undoubtedly become one of the strongest hunters. However, rumors about him continued to spark debates. Some claimed to have seen the master defeat 3 werewolves alone at level 72, or kick a level 10 monster with ease. But many believed these stories were just myths. In reality, the man fought Balok using only his feet. He stepped on the monster's head, smiling with a psychopathic expression. In just 3 seconds, Balok was defeated. A notification appeared. Balok defeated with the final blow. Casually, the man stepped on the fallen monster's body, wondering to himself, what else should I do to make this more interesting? Over the last 12 years, the time it takes for prospective hunters to complete the tutorial tower has gotten shorter. The tutorial tower across the world has the same content, so there have been no significant changes in the challenges faced. Because of this, each time a new group of hunters manages to make it out, information about their strategies and attack methods spreads worldwide. Many countries have raced to share this information to improve the survival chances of participants and to create the best hunters. However, despite more refined strategies and broader knowledge, only a few manage to conquer the tower. When prospective hunters reach level 99, they face the final trial, Balok, the ruler of the tutorial tower. This terrifying monster has become a nightmare for many. Of the 95 participants who managed to reach this level, only 25 made it out alive, while the rest lost their lives. Balok became a symbol of fear and an almost impossible challenge to overcome. However, there was one figure who was different. He was a man known as the Master, someone who had completed the tutorial tower 1,349 times. Standing in front of the exit portal of the tower, he closed his eyes, hoping that this time he could finally leave. But, as always, when he opened his eyes, he was back at the first level. The conquest began again. This time, it was his 1350th. Seeing this reality, he could only laugh bitterly. Frustrated, he shouted, wanting to go home, wanting to leave the tower. But his cries echoed in vain. He collapsed, lying on the ground, staring blankly at the information screen. His name was Hyeon-Woo Kim. He was 24 years old. In his heart, he thought repeating this over and over would no longer bring any new experiences. There were no more challenges, only the emptiness that kept repeating. 12 years ago, when Hyeon-Woo and his team first entered the tutorial tower, everything felt different. They were the first group to successfully reach level 100. Standing in front of the portal, they laughed happily, confident that their struggle was over. They promised each other to stay in touch in the outside world. But something strange happened. When Hyeon-Woo stepped into the portal, he suddenly found himself back at the first level. His friends were nowhere to be seen, and he was alone. Confusion turned into frustration as he realized he was trapped in the tower. In the subsequent repeats, he began to realize that he gained new abilities. But along with that, he also received the tower's curse. This curse prevented him from leaving. The only way to lift it was to complete the tower alone, without anyone's help. He tried everything. In the first 10 repeats, Hyeon-Woo strengthened himself, pushing his abilities to their maximum. In the end, even the stone pillars in the tower could be easily destroyed. But every time he reached level 100 and defeated Balok, he would always return to the first level. 5 years passed. In desperation, Hyeon-Woo tried everything to break the curse, but all his efforts were in vain. Eventually, he began to accept his fate. In repeat 433, he tried role-playing as an NPC, helping other participants who had just entered the tower. In repeat 512, he became an instructor, training new hunters to survive. However, there was one thing he couldn't stand, hearing stories about the outside world from participants who were about to leave. Every time he heard those stories, the feeling of isolation haunted him even more. Time passed, and Hyeon-Woo went through repeat after repeat without purpose, until finally, 12 years had passed. When he opened the information screen, he didn't expect anything to change. However, this time there was a new message that surprised him. The system notified him that Hyeon-Woo had completed the tower and was finally able to leave. Hyeon-Woo remained silent. After a moment, he smiled, then burst into joyful laughter. With the passion that had long been lost, he prepared to conquer the tower once again, this time for the last time. With burning determination, he took his stance, shot forward, and began tearing through each level of the tower at an incredible speed. Now, there was only one thing on his mind: the freedom he had been waiting for. Generally, the fastest time to complete the tutorial tower is around 10 months. In a popular TV program, the host asked whether the hunters from the 18th wave could break that record. SAO Young Lee explained that the number of hunters entering each wave differs, and the outcome heavily depends on their power combinations. Changes in strategy and results would occur frequently. Sehyun Kim added that success also depends on the individual and the effectiveness of their attacks. SEO Kwan Han interjected that the real challenge begins after level 51, as from that point, bosses with higher difficulty levels appear every 10 levels. He emphasized that from there on, luck no longer plays a role. Meanwhile, Hyeon-Woo, with renewed energy, continued charging forward, breaking through each level without concern for the monsters in his way. He pressed on relentlessly until he finally reached level 99. There, he stood calmly, facing Balok, the ruler. With all his strength, he struck the monster with such a devastating blow that the effects were even visible from outside the tower. The next day, in Hangdong District, Cheonho, at the entrance management area of the tutorial tower, a dimensional portal suddenly appeared. This event caused a stir at the monitoring office managed by the Korean Hunter Association. The association quickly prepared a list of names for the 18th wave participants to record who successfully made it out. From the portal emerged a human figure. It was Hyeon-Woo. He stepped out, looking around with a relieved expression. The towering buildings in front of him were a clear sign that he had finally made it out of the tower. Hyeon-Woo chuckled softly, surveying his surroundings, ensuring he was truly back in the outside world. Soon after, an association officer approached him to congratulate him on his success in leaving the tower. Hyeon-Woo turned to him, double-checking by asking if he had really made it out. The officer, though confused, confirmed that Hyeon-Woo had indeed exited the tower. Hearing this, Hyeon-Woo beamed, his eyes welling up. He shouted joyfully, "I'm out! Hyeon-Woo Kim is back." The association officer, hearing his name, immediately checked the list of the 18th wave participants, but Hyeon-Woo Kim's name was not there. Curious, he checked the first wave list. That's when he found Hyeon-Woo's name at the top. The officer was stunned to realize that the person in front of him was the legendary figure known as the Master, who had finally exited the tower after 12 years. A week later, the world's attention turned to Korea. People from all over the globe flocked to the tutorial headquarters, where the first evaluation of the 18th wave hunters would take place. This wave attracted attention because the world record for completing the tower was shattered, with a time of just 2 weeks. However, the main spotlight was still on Hyeon-Woo, the master hunter. In the evaluation waiting room, the 18th wave hunters appeared busy preparing themselves. They wore the basic gear provided earlier for the exam. But in the corner of the room, Hyeon-Woo sat relaxed, casually snacking without any gear on. The other participants felt confused and uncomfortable seeing Hyeon-Woo's relaxed attitude. Not realizing the situation, Hyeon-Woo asked one of the participants, "What is everyone wearing?" The participant explained that the gear had been distributed earlier that morning and was crucial for the exam. Without the gear, the exam would be much more difficult. Hyeon-Woo simply scratched his head, guessing he hadn't received the gear because he had overslept. Suddenly, an announcement echoed, instructing the participants to head to the exam location. The exam area was a special labyrinth designed by the Seoul Tutorial Center to evaluate the hunters' ranks. There, an examiner named David, an A-class hunter, stood in front of the participants. In a loud voice, he announced that the rank evaluation would begin soon. David informed the participants that the eyes of the world were on them. Some participants seemed burdened by the pressure. Seeing this, David smiled and tried to ease the tension. He explained that they didn't need to be overly nervous because compared to the challenges of the tutorial tower, this exam was just a formality to certify them as hunters. At the back of the room, Hyeon-Woo wasn't paying attention. He yawned and appeared sleepy. David continued his explanation, introducing the first exam. As he pressed something on his phone, a violent tremor shook the ground, startling the participants. Calmly, David explained that, as hunters, they needed to be prepared for various challenges, including escaping tricky situations like the labyrinth. The tremor had turned the floor behind David into a large labyrinth. He explained that the labyrinth was filled with traps. Although the exam was just a formality, he advised the participants to use all their strength. They had 30 minutes to escape the labyrinth. The participants quickly prepared and entered the labyrinth with high spirits, running and competing to be the first to get out. Seeing their enthusiasm, David praised their excellent mindset and looked forward to the results. However, while he was still deep in thought, Hyeon-Woo suddenly called out to him from behind. David turned, slightly confused, and asked what Hyeon-Woo wanted. Calmly, Hyeon-Woo asked, "Can I escape the labyrinth however I want?" David, curious about this participant, lowered his sunglasses and stared at Hyeon-Woo closely. Seeing that Hyeon-Woo wasn't wearing any gear like the others, David wondered if he was serious about the exam. But, as explained earlier, David replied that as long as he could get out by any means, it was allowed. He then asked seriously, "Are you underestimating this exam?" However, Hyeon-Woo responded casually, telling David to focus more on the other participants who were struggling. Upon hearing this, David's anger began to show. He felt that Hyeon-Woo was too arrogant, but Hyeon-Woo remained relaxed and confidently said, "How about we bet $1,000,000? I can escape the labyrinth in 20 seconds. David furrowed his brow, not believing what he was hearing, but Hyeon-Woo kept provoking him. "If you're scared, maybe you shouldn't bet," he said. Feeling challenged, David reluctantly agreed to the bet, though still doubtful. Hyeon-Woo walked toward the nearest wall of the labyrinth, placed his hand on the wall, and got into position. His left hand touched the wall, while his right hand prepared to strike. Seriously, he exerted a small percentage of his strength. The energy pressure he unleashed was so intense that his feet sank into the floor. David, watching closely, was confused about what Hyeon-Woo was going to do. Even Hyeon-Woo's old friends, who were the leaders of Korea's top guilds, seemed puzzled by his actions. When the power in his right hand was fully gathered, Hyeon-Woo punched the labyrinth wall with tremendous force. The wall seemed to soften momentarily before his fist broke through. The punch caused an incredible effect, destroying the labyrinth until it pierced through to the other side. Calmly, Hyeon-Woo walked toward the exit he had just created. Standing casually, he said, "I'm out." The observers in the observation room were stunned by the spectacle. Even his friends started to wonder if Hyeon-Woo was always this casual. He smiled, imagining the 1,000,000 won he would soon earn so easily. However, that smile slowly turned into a worried expression as he thought, "Will I have to compensate for destroying the labyrinth?" Meanwhile, 24 hours before the ranking evaluation exam, at a building called Live Hunter magazine, where news about hunters is updated, journalists were discussing what interesting news they would release. In addition to talking about the master, one man suggested highlighting a person who was gaining attention as a powerful hunter from the martial arts world. That person was named Lee Kang-hyun. During the labyrinth exam earlier, Lee Kang-hyun had made up his mind to become the star. With the talent, skill, and luck he possessed, he was sure he would catch everyone's eye. When other hunters fled in fear from a giant monster before them, Kang-hyun boldly prepared to face the monster with his sword. In his mind, he believed in his abilities. As a level 4 kendo master, Lee Kang-hyun had won various international kendo competitions and was known as a tough leader. This time, he hoped to be the center of attention, believing that the path to success was wide open for him. However, his mind wandered back to his first encounter with Hyeon-Woo at the tower tutorial. When they first met in front of the exit portal, Hyeon-Woo had shouted with excitement, stealing the entire spotlight that should have been his. Kang-hyun, who felt confused and annoyed by that incident, now found himself facing Hyeon-Woo again in the outside world. He felt he had to compete with someone completely different from him. Meanwhile, an announcement came from the exam committee stating that, for security reasons, the first labyrinth exam would be temporarily halted. Participants were asked to return to the waiting room and wait for the rescheduled exam. Chaos erupted in the reporter's room as they scrambled to find footage of the earlier event. However, all the clear footage only showed Lee Kang-hyun. This was because, at first, no one had noticed Hyeon-Woo, the disheveled figure wearing flip-flops. But now, that person was the center of attention. In the participants' waiting room, the tension was palpable. Kang Hyun sat with a serious and angry expression, while Hyeon-Woo was peacefully asleep. The other participants whispered about the explosion caused by Hyeon-Woo. Some even referred to him as the Master. But in his own mind, Lee Kang-hyun was undeterred. He thought to himself that this wasn't over, and there was still a chance for him to reclaim the spotlight. Soon, another announcement came from the exam committee. The order of the ranking evaluation exams has been changed and will resume in 15 minutes. Participants are asked to prepare. Hyeon-Woo, who had been sound asleep, woke up with a groggy face. Meanwhile, Lee Kang-hyun remained lost in thought. He didn't care who Hyeon-Woo was, whether he was a master or not. Kang-hyun was confident in his own skills. This time, the exam was the Monster Wave evaluation, where participants had to fight virtual monsters created with the latest technology and magical stones. Lee Kang-hyun entered the arena with full confidence. With his sword in hand, he unleashed an incredible amount of power. Lightning struck through his sword, grabbing everyone's attention. Full of energy, Kang-hyun launched continuous attacks, cutting down the monsters that stood in his way. One by one, the monsters fell quickly. This exam required participants to defeat as many monsters as possible within the time limit. When Kang-hyun's time ran out, he had managed to defeat 78 monsters, the highest among all previous participants. Kang-hyun smiled in satisfaction. Finally, he had earned the spotlight he had long desired. The reporters watching from another room praised his greatness. However, that pride didn't last long. The next name called was Hyeon-Woo Kim. With a sleepy expression, Hyeon-Woo casually walked into the arena. Kang-hyun looked irritated by his relaxed attitude. The audience, who knew that the next contestant was the master, was extremely curious to see his performance. Even Hyeon-Woo's old friends, who had once been in the same party with him, were eagerly waiting. Hyeon-Woo was given 2 minutes to defeat as many monsters as possible. All eyes were on him. The atmosphere grew tense, waiting for what the master would do. The test began with numerous monsters spawning around Hyeon-Woo. At the same time, a 10-second countdown began, giving him time to prepare. The audience waited eagerly, still wondering what kind of action the master would show. However, Hyeon-Woo, standing casually in the middle of the arena, simply sighed, unaffected by the atmosphere. Even as the timer hit 0, he remained calm and made no significant movement. When the countdown finished and the test officially began, a large orc attacked first, swinging its massive club brutally. But with incredible speed, Hyeon-Woo suddenly rushed toward the orc. In an instant, the orc's head was shattered. The action was so fast that it couldn't be followed by the human eye. The audience only saw the end result. The orc's head simply exploded. Only 4 seconds had passed, but the monsters around Hyeon-Woo had already fallen one by one. All that was visible were their heads, seemingly exploding for no reason. The audience watching this unfold began to speculate. Many thought Hyeon-Woo was using magic to destroy the monsters. However, in reality, Hyeon-Woo was attacking each monster directly, approaching them one by one and crushing their heads with a simple physical strike. There were no complicated techniques or magic behind his actions. His movements were so fast that everything seemed like an illusion. Hyeon-Woo's old friends watching from a distance were stunned. They wondered what Hyeon-Woo had actually been doing in the tutorial tower. All they knew was that Hyeon-Woo had always been known as a big name. But now, they realized one thing. Hyeon-Woo had turned into something far more terrifying. A monster in human form. When the timer hit 0, signaling the end of the test, Hyeon-Woo stood relaxed. In just 2 minutes, he had defeated 248 monsters. An incredible achievement. Hyeon-Woo's actions quickly became the center of attention. A video of his test was uploaded with the title, The Master, and it quickly went viral. Many people questioned his strength. Some even assumed that Hyeon-Woo was an S-class magician. Elsewhere, Lee Kang-hyun watched the news on his phone. His face turned red. His hands trembled. The spotlight he had just gained was now completely shifted to Hyeon-Woo. It's unfair! In his rage, he destroyed his phone, throwing it until it shattered into pieces. Not only that, but the door of his room was also destroyed, and the surrounding walls cracked. He shouted in frustration, cursing Hyeon-Woo as a cheater and an absurd character. I've worked so hard, fought desperately, even hunted one extra monster when the other participants were already finished. But now, all his efforts felt wasted. On the other side, Hyeon-Woo remained calm in his room. Suddenly, a woman named Alice came to visit him. Alice worked as an information manager and was part of the Korea Hunter Committee. She spoke at length, explaining the purpose of her visit. However, Hyeon-Woo, who wasn't interested, only listened half-heartedly. In short, Alice had come personally to recruit Hyeon-Woo to join the Ari's Guild. She handed him a contract. The contract contained the rights and responsibilities of Ari's Guild members, including payment details. When Hyeon-Woo read it, he was surprised by the first clause. Once the contract is signed, the down payment amount listed will be paid in full to the member. Hyeon-Woo counted the zeros on the number listed. The number seemed so long. Alice smiled and asked, "So, are you interested in joining?" Hyeon-Woo just remained silent. He couldn't even imagine what it would feel like to receive an advance payment of 10 billion won. Before that, Hyeon-Woo asked since when the value of Korean currency had plummeted and whether a crisis had occurred. Alice responded that while there had been difficulties due to the appearance of monsters, Korea had not experienced an economic crisis. On the contrary, land prices had actually risen. Alice showed her phone to Hyeon-Woo, displaying the land prices around the area where he used to live. Hyeon-Woo was shocked to see that the land, which was once worth $3 billion, had now risen to $13 billion. He was stunned by the revelation. Alice continued, explaining that even though land prices had increased, Hyeon-Woo didn't need to worry too much, because the $10 billion mentioned in the contract was just a down payment. If he decided to sign a new contract after the first one ended, he would receive twice that amount. Hyeon-Woo fell silent, frozen at the thought of $20 billion. Alice added that, of course, he would have to share the loot from the labyrinth with the guild, but the distribution ratio would still be overwhelmingly in his favor. With a serious expression, Hyeon-Woo asked if handling guild contracts like this was really part of a Hunter Committee information manager's job. Alice explained that she had personal connections with a recruiter from the Aries Guild, who had asked her to deliver this proposal. Hyeon-Woo recalled that contract recommendations weren't allowed during the training period. Seeing his confusion, Alice told him that he didn't need to decide right away. However, Hyeon-Woo immediately stated that he had already made up his mind from the start. He had no intention of joining any guild. Alice smiled wryly at his answer, thinking he was joking, but Hyeon-Woo assured her that he was completely serious. He had no interest in working under the constraints of a guild. Alice, still unconvinced, could only let out a small laugh. After that, Hyeon-Woo returned to his room. He thought about how this world operated on a give-and-take principle. There was no way they would offer $10 billion without expecting something significant in return. He was certain that accepting the money would come with many complicated obligations. He didn't like dealing with such things and only wanted to live a comfortable, carefree life, doing whatever he pleased. He recalled his earlier debate with Alice. Before she left, Alice had asked if he had any intention of working as a hunter. Hyeon-Woo casually replied that he had heard of hunters who worked independently. Alice immediately dismissed the idea, saying that it was impossible for a hunter to explore labyrinths alone without a guild's support. She felt that Hyeon-Woo was being arrogant because, in reality, it wasn't as easy as he imagined. Before leaving, Alice reminded him once again to call the number on her business card if he ever changed his mind. Hyeon-Woo simply waved his hand and walked away. In his room, Hyeon-Woo regretted the time he had wasted taking the ranking exam. He thought that if he had known about mercenary hunters earlier, he would have just slept instead of wasting his time. He checked the list of guilds that wanted to meet him and noticed a familiar name. 5 days later, on the last day of the new hunter protection period, Hyeon-Woo met with his 3 former party members at a Japanese restaurant in Mokdo. He was surprised to see Seo-Kwan looking much older, even though they were close in age. Si-Hyun Kim, who used to be a grumbling high school student, had now grown into a handsome man, and Seo-Yong, who once looked plain, had completely transformed into someone unrecognizable. Hyeon-Woo called out to Si-Hyun Kim, reminding him of how he used to whine whenever they faced the boss on the 50th floor. Si-Hyun Kim panicked and got angry, frustrated that Hyeon-Woo only remembered the embarrassing things about him. Then, Hyeon-Woo turned to Seo-Yong and brought up the time she wet herself on the 14th floor. Seo-Yong was furious and humiliated. After that, Hyeon-Woo happily enjoyed the sushi in front of him, still in disbelief that he had survived 12 years in the tower without delicious food like this. Hearing that, Si-Hyun Kim laughed, recalling the time on the 70th floor when they encountered a merman. Back then, Hyeon-Woo had been excited, thinking that the merman could be turned into sushi. They had also grown accustomed to the strange stories circulating about Hyeon-Woo outside the tower. Curious, Hyeon-Woo asked what kind of stories they meant. The 3 of them explained that he was so famous that everything he did in the tower had been broadcasted on TV. Hyeon-Woo was stunned, frozen at the thought that all of his actions had been widely exposed. He started wondering what kind of embarrassing moments had gone viral. It turned out that the most well-known stories were about him defeating a dungeon boss while dancing and clearing floors 1 through 10 using only kicks. With a slight sense of relief, Hyeon-Woo admitted that, yes, those stories were true. Si-Hyun Kim, still curious, asked what exactly Hyeon-Woo had been doing during those 12 years in the tower. Hyeon-Woo started explaining that when he fought while dancing, but then he paused and continued eating his sushi. His friends fell silent, eagerly waiting for him to continue. Hyeon-Woo simply shrugged and said he had done it on a whim, thinking it might somehow be a way to escape. Then, he went on to talk about how he had kicked his way up to the 10th floor. At the time, he was just bored, and when he jumped, he suddenly realized he could keep going up. Seo-Kwan, who had watched Hyeon-Woo's ranking exam, admitted that he had already thought Hyeon-Woo had become a monster. And now, after hearing these stories straight from him, he was even more convinced. But for Hyeon-Woo, his time in the tower had been nothing but frustration. He had tried every possible way to escape. After that, Hyeon-Woo asked if his disciple had made it out. Seo-Yong was shocked to hear that Hyeon-Woo had a disciple. Hyeon-Woo then explained that back on the 50th and 60th floors, there had been a kid who got left behind in the tower. The boy had been terrified, and at the time, Hyeon-Woo, who was playing the role of a mysterious figure wearing a skull mask, had approached him and said, "Oh, weak human, do you wish to survive? I shall be waiting for you." With that dramatic flair, Hyeon-Woo claimed he had invented a new martial art and ended up taking the boy as his disciple. Seo Kwon was completely mind-blown by the story, but Hyeon-Woo admitted that he had been bluffing the whole time. He actually knew nothing about martial arts. All he could do was fight with brute strength. Thinking about it now, he started feeling guilty about the boy. On top of that, his bad personality made it seem like he had no conscience. He could only hope he wouldn't run into the boy in the outside world. He didn't want to get sued. Fortunately, he had been wearing a mask back then. After chatting for a while, the four of them started discussing the world that Hyeon-Woo had left behind for 12 years. Back in his room, Hyeon-Woo stared at his information screen in confusion. Some of the text had disappeared, as if he had reached the tutorial limit, and the number 36, his age, was also gone. It felt like the 12 years he had spent in the tower had vanished just like that. He began to think that from now on, he should live while making money, but still doing the things he enjoyed. However, one thing puzzled him. The words "freed from repetition" were still displayed on the screen. Curious, he clicked on it. Immediately, new text appeared. To proceed to the next stage, please clear 3 new dungeon bosses: a Doron laboratory, Forest Village, and the Invisible Swamp. Hyeon-Woo was still trying to figure out the details of this quest when someone called out to him from outside. He opened the door to find a hotel staff member, who informed him that someone from the Aries Guild wanted to meet him. Without hesitation, Hyeon-Woo told the staff to let them know he wasn't interested. However, the hotel staff, now flustered, explained that even though he refused, they were still insisting on meeting him. The staff practically begged him to at least hear them out. Realizing that this situation would only drag on if he didn't put an end to it properly, Hyeon-Woo sighed. Finally, as he closed his door, he decided to meet them just once and asked the staff to lead the way. On the first floor lounge, 2 members of the Aries Guild were already waiting. The moment he arrived, Hyeon-Woo made it clear that he had no intention of joining their guild. One of them, who introduced himself as the hiring manager for Aries, asked, "Will you really be okay?" Hyeon-Woo frowned. "What do you mean by that?" With a condescending tone, the manager smirked. "Do you really think you can get anywhere without joining Aries? If you join us, you won't have to waste your efforts on pointless struggles." Hyeon-Woo responded with a sly smile. "So, you came all this way just to threaten me?" The manager's bodyguard immediately flared up, furious at Hyeon-Woo's attitude. But the manager quickly signaled for him to calm down. The manager then continued, saying that he simply hoped Hyeon-Woo would take their offer seriously. He also suggested that maybe Hyeon-Woo didn't know much about the Aries Guild. But before he could say anything else, Hyeon-Woo cut him off. "Oh, I know plenty about Aries." He went on to explain that the Aries Guild was responsible for wiping out more than half of Korea's dungeons, widely known as a corrupt organization that abused its power. Hyeon-Woo had learned this from his 3 former party members. He also pointed out that Aries controlled 66% of Korea's dungeons, particularly D-class dungeons for rookies and A-class dungeons ideal for farming. With massive foreign investments, the guild was overflowing with money. However, any rookie who wanted to succeed only had 2 choices: pay an absurdly high entry fee or join Aries. The bodyguard, unable to tolerate Hyeon-Woo's insults any longer, slammed his fist on the table, shattering it instantly. The manager, still trying to maintain composure, gave Hyeon-Woo a warning. "Even within the Hunter Committee, you should be careful with your words," he said. "Aries has plenty of connections there." He then once again urged Hyeon-Woo to reconsider. To further intimidate him, the bodyguard grabbed what remained of the table and hurled it against the wall as if to flaunt his strength. The manager, full of confidence, then smirked and introduced his bodyguard. "This man is one of the strongest hunters, rated A overall. If you go up against him, you won't stand a chance." But Hyeon-Woo only smiled lazily. Without a hint of concern, he slipped off his flip-flops and stood up. Then, in an utterly casual tone, he told the bodyguard to come at him, because he'd only be using his flip-flops as a weapon. The bodyguard's face twisted with rage. He had never felt so insulted in his life. Cursing under his breath, the bodyguard clenched his fists, ready to punch Hyeon-Woo. But Hyeon-Woo remained calm, holding a flip-flop in his right hand. The moment the bodyguard's fist was about to land, Hyeon-Woo swiftly smacked his flip-flop straight into the man's face. The impact was brutal. The bodyguard was knocked out instantly, his body flung backward until he crashed into the wall, half of his torso embedded inside from the sheer force. The manager, witnessing this, was utterly stunned. He had seen Hyeon-Woo's training assessment footage before. Back then, he did think Hyeon-Woo was stronger than expected, but in his mind, he still saw him as nothing more than a frog trapped in a dungeon, thinking he was the strongest in the world. In this scenario, he had envisioned the power and influence of the Aries Guild should have been enough to make Hyeon-Woo kneel, but reality had completely flipped his expectations. His bodyguard had been completely wrecked by nothing more than a flip-flop. The manager's thoughts raced. How was this even possible? Hyeon-Woo had no magic, yet his strength was overwhelming. It simply didn't make sense. His thoughts were cut short when Hyeon-Woo casually began walking toward him. In a calm yet terrifying voice, Hyeon-Woo asked, "Do you know what I hate the most?" The manager, now backing away in fear until his back was pressed against the wall, couldn't find the words to respond. Hyeon-Woo continued, "I hate people who try to threaten me." With his flip-flop, now half destroyed from smashing the bodyguard, Hyeon-Woo delivered the same attack straight at the manager. Later that night, Hyeon-Woo stayed at Si-Hyun Kim's apartment. Si-Hyun, who had already heard what happened, warned him, "You should be careful. The Aries Guild is dangerous." But Hyeon-Woo, casually enjoying a fresh strawberry, simply chuckled and asked, "What's so dangerous?" Si-Hyun sighed. "They don't play around, Hyeon-Woo. Most people avoid getting into trouble with them." Still relaxed, Hyeon-Woo asked, "And how exactly do they handle problems?" Si-Hyun explained, "They can blacklist you, making sure no other guild will take you in, and if things get worse, they can even take you out in a labyrinth, making it look like an accident." Hyeon-Woo took another bite of his strawberry, savoring its sweetness. Didn't think they were that ruthless. But to Si-Hyun, the real ruthless one here was Hyeon-Woo himself. With a worried expression, Si-Hyun offered, "Why don't you just join my guild? You'd be safer that way." But Hyeon-Woo simply shook his head. "I already told you, I'm not joining any guild." Si-Hyun frowned. "Don't you want to live peacefully?" Hyeon-Woo let out a small sigh. "I do, but I'll have to put that on hold for now. There's something I need to take care of first." Then he suddenly asked, "Have you heard of Aderon Laboratory?" Si-Hyun looked confused, but Hyeon-Woo kept his thoughts to himself. 12 years. For 12 years, he had been trapped inside that tower. Why was he the only one who couldn't leave? Why was he forced to stay? These unanswered questions, his bottled-up frustration, had been building inside him for far too long. Who built that tower? Why did they imprison him for 12 years? Whoever was behind it, Hyeon-Woo was going to make them suffer the way he did. Si-Hyun, noticing his serious expression, asked, "Why are you suddenly asking about that place?" But Hyeon-Woo didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Do you know anything about that dungeon?" Si-Hyun nodded. "Aderon Laboratory? It's a C-rank dungeon in Gyeongbu. It's considered a great place for rookie hunters to level up." But then he hesitated. "Though, I don't think you can get in." Hyeon-Woo frowned. "Why not?" Si-Hyun sighed. "Like I said earlier, the Aries Guild monopolizes most dungeons, and Aderon is one of them." Hyeon-Woo's expression darkened. "How is that even possible? Doesn't the government step in? Isn't there some kind of anti-monopoly law?" Si-Hyun replied calmly, "The government and politicians don't care about hunters. To them, we're not worth the trouble." He paused before adding, "Think about it. How many people actually make it out of the tutorial tower and become real hunters?" Hyeon-Woo paused for a moment, then asked again, "But I've heard people are getting killed inside the dungeon. Isn't that murder?" Si-Hyun explained, "Dungeons are extremely dangerous. No police officer would bother investigating. They just call it an accident." Hyeon-Woo furrowed his brows even deeper. "This is completely messed up," he muttered. Si-Hyun continued, "On the outside, Ares is seen as a leading company in this new industry. They pay their taxes on time, and the hunter profession outside the tower is highly respected by the public." Hyeon-Woo got up from his seat. "What if I sneak in?" Si-Hyun immediately warned him. "There are Ares members guarding the place 24/7. Hyeon-Woo thought for a moment before coming up with another plan. "Then I'll just walk in through the front door." Si-Hyun was shocked. "If you do that, you'll make an enemy of the entire Aries Guild." He reminded Hyeon-Woo of what happened earlier when he beat up the guild manager and the bodyguard, but Hyeon-Woo simply shrugged. The damage was already done. Meanwhile, at the Ares Guild headquarters, the higher-ups were discussing their expansion plans into China. One of them mentioned that the process would take at least 5 months. Hyeon-Woo, the head of Ares Guild in Korea and an S-class hunter, asked, "How long would it take to expand into Russia or Japan?" A subordinate answered, "For Russia, at least 8 months. For Japan, around 7. Hyeon-Woo smirked. "It doesn't matter if it takes time. What matters is that we stay one step ahead of the competition." He compared the situation to hunting. "We don't have to run faster than the dungeon boss. We just need to run faster than everyone else." He then instructed his subordinates to continue monitoring the progress. Not long after, a subordinate handed Hyeon-Woo a report, an analytical breakdown of Hyeon-Woo's stats that he had requested. As Hyeon-Woo reviewed the data, he was puzzled. Hyeon-Woo excelled only in strength, agility, and stamina. The rest of his stats were just average. "Is the machine broken?" he asked. The subordinate shook his head. "We had doubts too, but the analysis team confirmed the data is accurate. No matter how much of a margin of error there is, the results remain the same." "Have we tried recruiting him?" "We did, but he turned us down." Hyeon-Woo pondered for a moment. Recruiting someone like Hyeon-Woo could be beneficial at first, but if he failed to meet expectations, it could backfire. "A poisoned apple," he murmured. "Looks delicious on the outside, but deadly if you take a bite." After a brief silence, he finally said, "Forget recruiting him. Hurt him instead." The subordinate nodded in agreement. Elsewhere, at Cheonbosan Mountain in Gyeongbu, right at the entrance of the C-class dungeon, Aderon Laboratory, a woman was pleading with the guards to let her in, but the guards refused since she didn't have an entry ticket. With a hesitant expression, the woman explained that this was the only place she could hunt. With an irritating smirk, one of the guards sneered, "Then go to the labyrinth. Plenty of low-level monsters there. It's free after all." Another guard laughed. If she really goes there, she might not come back alive. As they were still arguing, Hyeon-Woo arrived at the scene. The guards glanced at him, dressed in sportswear, carrying no equipment. "There's no public restroom here. Go to the forest instead," one of the guards barked. Hyeon-Woo looked at him calmly. "I'm here because I have business inside this dungeon, not to look for a toilet." The guard's anger flared. "This place is no joke. It's filled with monsters," he shouted. Hyeon-Woo stepped closer, a small smirk forming on his lips. With an intense gaze, he casually said, "Are you stupid?" The guard grew even more furious, seeing the man in front of him, acting all high and mighty. He spoke with authority, trying to assert dominance, saying that people like Hyeon-Woo should know their place. But instead of reacting, Hyeon-Woo just casually bent down. With complete ease, he took off one of his sandals and said, "I can't just let this slide." The guards were utterly confused and enraged. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. With a faint smile on his face, Hyeon-Woo gestured for one of the guards to come closer, but instead of complying, the guard only grew angrier, barking at him and calling him insane. Before he could finish his sentence, Hyeon-Woo swung his sandal with lightning speed, striking the guard square in the face. The impact was so powerful that the guard was sent flying backward, crashing into the metal fence behind him. The fence shattered into pieces, and the guard lay motionless, unconscious. The remaining guard stood frozen, eyes darting back to his fallen comrade, now sprawled out and unmoving. Shock and fear took hold of him. Amidst the tense silence, he heard Hyeon-Woo casually mumble that he should have controlled his strength better. Hyeon-Woo then turned to the trembling guard, stepping closer. Without hesitation, he demanded the man's shoes. Confused, the guard stammered, asking what Hyeon-Woo meant by that. But Hyeon-Woo simply shot him a cold, piercing stare and asked, "Do you want to end up like him?" Overwhelmed with fear, the guard quickly removed his shoes and handed them over without another word. Hyeon-Woo slipped them on and nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad," he muttered, steel-toed, yet still light. Meanwhile, the guard stood there in despair, knowing full well how expensive those shoes were. Noticing his expression, Hyeon-Woo smirked. "Relax, I'm not that cruel." He tossed his old, broken sandals at the guard as compensation, then casually walked into the dungeon, completely ignoring the man's silent misery. Elsewhere, in Seongnam District, at the Seoul Guild headquarters, Seo-young was furious with Si-hyun Kim. "You just let him go?" she snapped. Si-hyun defended himself. "He left on his own. There was nothing I could do to stop him." Seo-young clenched her fists in frustration. She voiced her concern about Aries Guild's cunning nature. Si-hyun, though he agreed, reminded her that Hyeon-Woo was as stubborn as they came. No amount of reasoning would ever change his mind. Seo-young sighed, finally admitting how difficult it was to deal with someone like him. She recalled Hyeon-Woo's nature, how he was usually calm and composed, but the moment he made an enemy, he wouldn't stop until he crushed them completely. Meanwhile, deep inside the C-rank dungeon, a figure stood at its core, Adoran, the dungeon boss. He had the unsettling appearance of a mad scientist, his grin twisted with obsession, his eyes filled with manic delight. Nearby, a group of hunters crouched in the shadows, carefully observing Adoran's movements. They knew taking him down wouldn't be very profitable. That's why Aries Guild had never bothered with this dungeon. Whispering amongst themselves, the hunters discussed their strategy. They were well aware that Adoran had high defense but weak attacks. With the right tactics and teamwork, they believed they could take him down. Just as they were about to move, their plans came to a sudden halt. Someone was walking straight into the boss's territory. Their eyes widened in disbelief. It was Hyeon-Woo. He strolled into the boss room with the same casual ease as if he were taking a leisurely walk. Now, he stood face to face with Adoran. The dungeon boss erupted into laughter, the sound echoing through the chamber. His face twisted with eerie excitement, as if he had just found a new plaything. With crazed enthusiasm, Adoran spoke, his voice dripping with anticipation. "So, where should we start the experiment? The eyes, the heart, or maybe the spine?" His grin widened as he stared at Hyeon-Woo with uncontained excitement. "Just say the word," he cackled. "Whichever you choose, I'll make sure to handle it perfectly." Hyeon-Woo's childhood was filled with sorrow. After losing both of his parents in an accident, he was left in an orphanage. His uncle took all the inheritance that rightfully belonged to him, leaving the boy with nothing but despair. Perhaps due to his disappointment with the adults around him, Hyeon-Woo grew up to be a kind-hearted person. However, if anyone tried to control or suppress him, he would turn against them. In such situations, he often displayed extreme tendencies, unleashing everything on his opponent. Back in Adoran's lab, the dungeon boss was still reveling in his excitement. To him, Hyeon-Woo was nothing more than a new test subject. But his joy was short-lived. With a swift motion, Hyeon-Woo delivered a devastating kick to Adoran's head, obliterating the dungeon boss in an instant. The party of hunters, who had been watching from a distance, stood in stunned silence. None of them had expected Adoran to be taken down with a single strike. Hyeon-Woo pulled up his system interface and saw the notification confirming the completion of Adoran's dungeon. Wasting no time, he set his sights on his next destination, Forest Village. The party, now realizing who was standing before them, felt a chill run down their spines. His signature hairstyle, his casual sportswear. There was no doubt about it. This man was the master, the #1 ranked hunter. They could hardly believe their eyes. At the Korean branch of Aries Guild, deep in the management sector on the 5th basement floor, the head of HR met with Hyeon-Woo, the branch's chief of operations. The HR head requested that Hyeon-Woo educate Hyeon-Woo properly. However, he also added that, regardless of the method used, it was fine if things got a little extreme. Hyeon-Woo raised an eyebrow. "Is that your personal request?" The HR head sighed. "Hyeon-Woo rampaging through our dungeon and taking down our guards has tarnished Aries Guild's reputation." Cheon-myung listened carefully, then gave a small nod. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll handle him myself, and I won't go easy on him." Satisfied with that answer, the HR head nodded and left the room. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Hyeon-Woo was busy playing with his new phone. Si-hyun had bought it for him, hoping to make communication easier. But 3 hours had passed, and Hyeon-Woo was still completely engrossed in taking random pictures. Annoyed, Si-hyun finally spoke up. "That Forest Village dungeon you asked about, my guild is in charge of it." Hyeon-Woo barely paid attention. Si-hyun continued. "Right now, there's no boss monster inside." That got Hyeon-Woo's attention. He immediately turned to Si-hyun, surprised. "What? Why not?" Si-hyun sighed and explained. "Dungeons in the real world are different from the tutorial tower. In the tower, monsters, including bosses, regenerate within a day. But in real-world dungeons, bosses take much longer to respawn." Hyeon-Woo's curiosity grew. "How long does the Forest Village boss take to regenerate?" "About a month," Si-hyun answered. "The last one was taken down 4 weeks ago, so it should respawn in the next 2 or 3 days." Hyeon-Woo nodded, relieved that he wouldn't have to wait too long. Then he asked about the invisible swamp dungeon. Si-hyun hesitated. "I don't know much about that one. Aries Guild has a monopoly over it." Hearing that, Hyeon-Woo's expression darkened. Even catching monsters had become complicated because of the influence of major guilds. Si-hyun, sensing his frustration, offered a suggestion. "You should register with the Hunter Association's ranking system. That way, you'll get access to more facilities, including support from the association. Not to mention, the pay isn't bad." At the mention of money, Hyeon-Woo's eyes lit up. "Wait, I can get paid just for signing up?" Si-hyun chuckled. "Not exactly. Every 2 to 3 months, you'll need to show your performance." He then explained the payment system based on ranking. Rank B hunters receive 1.3 million won, Rank A hunters receive 2.5 million won, and Rank S hunters receive 7 million won. Hearing those numbers, Hyeon-Woo's excitement skyrocketed. Without hesitation, he turned to Si-hyun and insisted, "Take me to the Hunter Association first thing tomorrow." This video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next part.